I couldn't believe this was happening. He was standing next to me, almost touching me, and I could feel his breath on my skin. My stepfather, the one who had always been there for me, who had supported me, now he was closer than ever. There was something in his eyes that I couldn't understand. And then, when it got too real, I realized we were on the verge. But what would happen if we crossed that line? If these aren't just words, what then? I hadn't expected the night to end this way. I had dressed up carefully, picked out a cute outfit, and even tried to make myself look a little different than usual. I wanted it to be perfect. But as I sat across from him at the restaurant, the awkward silence between us told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't into me. The date was supposed to be simple, just a fun evening with someone I met online. Nothing serious. But by the end of the meal, I was already certain he wasn't interested in me. Not in the way I had hoped. As the waiter cleared the last of our dishes, he looked at me with this apologetic expression, almost as if he was about to say something important. "I think I should be honest with you," he said, avoiding my eyes. "I've been seeing someone else. She's my girlfriend, and I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to lead you on." I nodded, trying to hold back the wave of embarrassment that was crashing over me. I felt foolish, as if I had been naive to think something could come from this. I quickly grabbed my purse and stood up. "It's fine. Don't worry about it," I muttered, not wanting to make a scene. I left the restaurant in a daze, the weight of rejection heavy on my chest. My mind raced as I walked down the street, but the thoughts felt distant. I felt stupid, a little broken. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to go home, but I had no other place to be. By the time I walked through the door, it was late, and the house was quiet. My mother had gone to bed already. The soft glow of the living room light highlighted the empty space, and for a moment, I wished I could just disappear into the walls and forget about the date, forget about the whole evening. But it was impossible to push it away. I sighed and dropped my purse on the kitchen counter. That's when I heard footsteps approaching from behind. It was my stepfather, John. He was standing in the doorway, his expression soft but concerned. "Hey, you're back late," he said, his deep voice echoing in the otherwise silent house. "How was the date?" I paused for a moment. I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk about it, but there was something about John's presence that always made me feel a little better, like I could confide in him without judgment. Maybe it was the way he always listened, or maybe it was because, unlike my mom, he seemed more understanding when it came to things like this. "It was fine," I said, trying to sound casual. "Well, not really. He has a girlfriend. I found out at the end of dinner." I shrugged as I said it, not wanting to sound too hurt. But I knew the sting was there. I guess I wasn't what he expected. John took a step closer, his brows furrowing with genuine concern. "I'm sorry to hear that. But hey, don't let it get to you," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You're a great person. Anyone would be lucky to have you." I looked up at him, feeling a mix of gratitude and something else, something I hadn't quite recognized before. There was something comforting about the way he looked at me. It wasn't just sympathy, though I could tell he was sorry for me. It was more like he understood what it felt like to be in my shoes. "Thanks, John," I said quietly. I guess I needed to hear that. We stood there for a moment, in the quiet of the kitchen, before he spoke again. "You know, I've been where you are. Rejection sucks, but it doesn't mean anything about you, okay? It just means he wasn't the right one." I nodded, but there was still that emptiness inside me. It was hard to shake the feeling of being inadequate. I hated that I couldn't just forget about it. "Come on," John said after a moment. "You want to talk about it? Or you just need a distraction?" I looked at him. I hadn't really thought about it, but talking might help. I didn't want to feel this way anymore. "Maybe just talk. For a bit." "Sure," he replied, his voice warm, offering me that sense of security I had always found in him. He motioned toward the living room. "I'll grab us some drinks. You sit down." As he moved to the fridge, I took a seat on the couch. The silence between us didn't feel awkward. I knew I wasn't being judged. John was just here, in his usual calm manner, letting me work through whatever I was feeling. I didn't realize how much I needed this kind of support until now. He returned with a couple of beers, handing me one before sitting down beside me. "So, what happened? What exactly did he say?" I recounted the details, how he had been distant, how I had tried to brush it off, and then the bombshell about his girlfriend. I didn't mention how much it had hurt, how my mind kept replaying his words. I focused on the facts, trying not to dwell too much on the emotional weight. John listened intently, nodding occasionally. When I finished, he leaned back, his hand resting on the arm of the couch. "You know, sometimes people just don't see what's right in front of them. But it doesn't mean you're not enough. You're more than enough, trust me." I smiled faintly, appreciating the comfort he was offering. We talked a little longer, just chatting about random things, and I started to feel a little lighter. There was something about being with John that made everything seem more manageable, as though I wasn't alone in it all. It wasn't the best night, but it wasn't the worst either. At least I didn't have to carry the weight of rejection alone. As we finished our drinks, I realized something. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't focused on the rejection. I wasn't focused on what I had lost. I was focused on the fact that I wasn't alone, and for the first time tonight, that felt like enough. The days after the date blurred together. I kept busy with school, work, and trying to move past what had happened. But every now and then, my mind would drift back to that conversation with John. He had been so easy to talk to, so understanding in a way that no one else seemed to be. It was strange, but I started looking forward to the quiet moments we shared when my mom was busy or when we found ourselves alone in the house. It wasn't anything intentional. At first, I simply needed someone to talk to. John was always there. I never thought much of it, just a stepfather being kind to his stepdaughter, right? But then, I started noticing things. Little things. The way he'd smile at me when he handed me a cup of coffee in the morning. The way he seemed to linger a little longer when we talked, as if he were listening to more than just my words. It wasn't anything inappropriate, not at first. But over time, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe he was a little more invested than he should be. I didn't want to overthink it, but every time we were alone, that sense of comfort I felt around him started to feel like something else. It wasn't just his kindness or his willingness to listen. It was as if he was paying attention to me in a way that went beyond a fatherly role. And it wasn't just in those quiet moments. It was in the way he looked at me, his eyes lingering just a little too long when we spoke. It was the way his voice sounded when he said my name, as though it had a different weight to it. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself that I was just looking for something that wasn't there. But then, one night, it all changed. It started as just another ordinary evening. My mom had gone to a work event, leaving me alone with John. We were sitting in the living room, watching a movie together. It was one of those late nights when we had nothing better to do, and the house was quiet. John was sitting on the couch next to me, his legs stretched out in front of him. I was curled up, hugging a blanket around my shoulders. The movie was one of those cheesy rom-coms that neither of us really cared about, but it was just background noise. I wasn't paying much attention to the screen. Instead, my focus kept drifting back to John. Every now and then, our eyes would meet, and I'd quickly look away, embarrassed. But the tension wasn't the kind of tension you get when you're awkward. It was different. It was like a current running between us, something unspoken, yet undeniable. When the movie ended, neither of us moved immediately. The silence hung in the air, thick and heavy. I was about to get up and go to my room when John spoke. "You know, I'm really glad you're here," he said, his voice soft, almost too soft. "I've been meaning to tell you that. You've really grown up. I'm proud of you, you know?" I didn't know how to respond. I had always known John cared about me, but there was something in the way he said it that felt different, almost like he was saying more than just the words. "Thanks, John," I said quietly, not sure if I could look him in the eye. I turned my gaze to the floor, trying to ignore the growing unease in my chest. But then, without warning, he reached out and placed his hand on mine. It was just a light touch, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. His hand stayed there for a moment, and I felt a surge of heat rush to my face. I didn't pull away. I wasn't sure why, but I didn't. "I know this is a little strange," he said, his voice dropping lower, "but sometimes I feel like you're the only one I can talk to. You're easy to talk to. And I don't want you to feel like you're alone, especially with your mom always busy. I'm here for you." His words, though kind, felt loaded with something more. His hand, still resting on mine, didn't move. It was like a quiet invitation, but to what? I wasn't sure. For a moment, I felt frozen. Part of me wanted to pull away, to tell him it was too much, but the other part, the part that had been aching for understanding, for connection, was reluctant to let go. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know what he wanted from me, or what I even wanted from him. Finally, I pulled my hand away, trying to act as though nothing was out of the ordinary. "Yeah, I get it," I said, my voice a little shaky. "It's just been a lot, you know?" John nodded, his expression softening. "I understand. And I'm glad you feel comfortable talking to me about things. Don't ever hesitate to reach out, okay?" I gave him a small smile, my heart still racing. "Okay." I stood up, not sure how to feel. The moment had passed, but the feeling lingered. The tension between us hadn't disappeared, it had only grown stronger. And as I headed to my room, I couldn't shake the thought that something had shifted between us. I wasn't sure what it meant, but I knew one thing: it wasn't just the same anymore. The next few days were strangely quiet. It was as though everything had shifted, but no one dared to acknowledge it. John was still the same in many ways: kind, supportive, and always ready to listen. But there was a different energy in the house, an unspoken tension between us that neither of us addressed. I found myself growing more aware of every moment we spent alone, the way his eyes lingered on me, the way he would brush up against me casually when we passed through the kitchen. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but the more time passed, the more it became clear that something was happening between us, something that shouldn't have been happening. It wasn't like he was crossing any lines. He never said anything inappropriate, but his behavior was different, just enough to make me feel unsettled. It was small things at first: his voice being a little too warm when he said my name, the way he smiled when he looked at me, as though we shared some unspoken understanding, and I didn't know how to handle it. I started avoiding him, just a little. I'd make excuses to stay in my room or pretend to be busy with homework when he was around. But even when I wasn't in the same room with him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My mind raced every time I thought about it, replaying every interaction in my head, trying to figure out if I was reading too much into things. It was on a Saturday afternoon when everything changed. My mom had gone out shopping, leaving just me and John at home. It was a typical weekend, and I had planned to spend the day reading and relaxing. But when I walked into the living room, John was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. "Hey, you're home early," he said, looking up when I walked in. I nodded, but I could feel my heart rate pick up. It wasn't that I was scared of him, but there was something about being alone with him that made me nervous, and I couldn't explain it. "Yeah, just got tired," I said quickly. "I was planning on reading for a bit." John set his phone down and patted the seat next to him. "Well, come sit with me then. I could use the company." I hesitated for a moment, but something about his invitation made me feel like it was safe. After all, he was my stepfather. There was no harm in sitting with him, right? So, I sat down, a little farther away than usual, trying to keep things casual. We both sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the TV screen without really paying attention to it. The air between us felt thick, and I could tell he was struggling with something. I didn't know what, but I could feel it. I just wasn't sure if it was something I had done, or something else entirely. Finally, John spoke, his voice softer than usual. "You know, it's not easy, seeing you grow up. You've always been such a little girl to me, but now it feels different." His words were hesitant, but his gaze was fixed on me. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to tell him it was all in his head. But another part of me knew that wasn't true. I had felt the shift too. I had felt the way things had changed, and I wasn't sure what to make of it. "I know what you mean," I said, my voice shaky. "Things are different now. I don't know when it happened, but I feel it too." John turned to look at me then, and for the first time in a long while, his eyes seemed to search mine. "Do you ever think about us? About what this is?" he asked quietly. My heart pounded in my chest. I could feel the tension between us, thick and heavy, wrapping around me. He wasn't saying anything directly, but I knew exactly what he meant. And for the first time, I didn't have an answer. I felt a lump form in my throat. "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't know what to think." John leaned in a little, his gaze never leaving mine. His hand rested on the couch next to me, his fingers almost touching mine. The space between us felt smaller, and I could feel the air around us growing thicker. It was as if something was about to happen, but neither of us knew how to make the first move. "You don't have to answer right now," he said softly, "but just know that I'm here for you, no matter what." I nodded, unsure of what I was agreeing to, but the truth was, the more he said, the more I wanted to believe him. I didn't want to be alone in this feeling. I didn't want to feel lost. We sat there in silence for a while longer, neither of us speaking. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, suffocating me. I knew something had changed. I knew things couldn't go back to the way they were. Finally, I stood up, needing to get away from the tension that was building between us. "I think I'll go to my room," I said quietly. "I just need to be alone for a bit." John didn't try to stop me. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "Okay, I'll be around if you need me." I walked to my room, closing the door behind me. But as soon as I sat down on my bed, I realized I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shifted between us. The line had been blurred, and now I didn't know how to unsee it. The following week felt strangely out of sync. I couldn't focus on anything. Every conversation with John seemed to carry an underlying weight I couldn't ignore. Every time we were in the same room, it was as though the space between us was charged, vibrating with the tension that neither of us dared to acknowledge openly. But it was there, simmering beneath the surface, waiting to boil over. I caught myself thinking about him more often. It wasn't something I planned, but I couldn't help it. When I'd catch a glimpse of him in the kitchen or hear his voice calling me from another room, I would feel a knot form in my stomach. It wasn't anxiety, it was something else, something I couldn't name. Our interactions became less frequent, but they were more intense when they did happen. It was like we both knew the unspoken rules had shifted, but we were too afraid to acknowledge it. I found myself becoming more withdrawn, staying in my room as much as I could, and avoiding moments when we might be alone together. But I knew it wasn't helping. The tension was still there, and no amount of avoiding it seemed to make it go away. Then, one evening, my mom was away again. I had spent the entire afternoon in my room, trying to distract myself with homework, but it wasn't working. My mind kept drifting back to John, to the way his eyes lingered on me, the warmth of his presence, the way he seemed to be trying to get closer to me without saying anything at all. I tried to tell myself it was just in my head. He was just being nice. But every time I saw him, it felt harder to ignore the way he looked at me, like he was seeing something more than just his stepdaughter. Around 9 p.m., the house was quiet again. I heard John moving around in the kitchen, the sound of dishes clinking together as he cleaned up after dinner. I debated whether or not to go downstairs. I was hungry, but I wasn't sure I could handle being around him right now. But the hunger won out, and I slowly made my way down the stairs. When I entered the kitchen, John was standing by the counter, his back turned to me as he wiped down a plate. He didn't hear me at first, so I stood there for a moment, just watching him. I couldn't help but notice how he carried himself, confident, calm, like he belonged there. His presence filled the room in a way that made everything else seem insignificant. "Hey," I said softly, breaking the silence. He turned around with a smile, his expression warm but a little cautious, like he was unsure of how I would react. "Hey, you're up. You need anything?" I hesitated. I was just hungry. "I don't know if there's anything left from dinner." John nodded, walking over to the fridge. "I saved some for you." He pulled out a container and set it on the counter. "It's not much, but you're welcome to it." "Thanks," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I sat down at the kitchen table, not sure what to say next. The silence was thick between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just different. I could feel the weight of the unspoken words hanging in the air. John stood next to the counter, watching me, his eyes never leaving me for too long. "You know, it's been really nice having these moments with you," he said after a long pause. "I don't think I've said it enough, but I appreciate you, especially with how much your mom's been working lately. You've been really mature about everything." I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't sure if he was talking about his feelings or if he was just trying to make small talk. But his words lingered, and I couldn't ignore the undertone. I felt a strange pull toward him, like I wanted to say something, to let him know I appreciated his support too. But instead, I just nodded, taking a bite of the food he had given me. The room felt too small, the air too thick. It was like something was brewing just beneath the surface, something neither of us dared to fully acknowledge. "You okay?" John asked, his voice softer now. "You seem like something's been on your mind lately." I swallowed the bite in my mouth, trying to steady my thoughts. I wasn't sure what to say. I didn't want to confront him, didn't want to risk making things even more awkward than they already were. "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied quickly, though I wasn't sure if I believed myself. He raised an eyebrow, a small but perceptible shift in his expression. "You know you can talk to me, right?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked down at my plate, unsure of what to say. But the words came anyway, almost against my will. "I don't know what's happening anymore, John," I said softly. "Everything just feels different between us." I could hear the sharp intake of breath from across the room. It was so subtle that I almost missed it. John's gaze flickered toward the floor for a moment before he answered. "I know," he said quietly. "It's been hard for me too. But I'm here for you. And I always will be, no matter what." His words lingered in the air, heavy and final, but I wasn't sure what they meant. What was he really saying? Was he trying to reassure me? Or was there more to it? I wanted to ask him, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stood up, walking quickly toward the stairs. I couldn't stay there, couldn't handle the weight of his gaze on me any longer. "I'm going to bed," I said, almost too quickly. "Okay," John replied, his voice soft, and I heard him take a breath as though he wanted to say more. I didn't look back as I made my way up the stairs. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change again. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Things were getting harder to ignore. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to ignore them anymore. The following days felt like walking through a fog. Every moment spent with John was filled with an underlying tension I couldn't seem to escape. I thought about avoiding him, but I knew that only made it worse. It felt like we were both stuck in this strange limbo, not quite able to move forward but also unable to turn back. It was like the more we tried to pretend things were normal, the more everything felt wrong. I began to notice how often he was around, and how much we were beginning to interact. Whether it was helping me with something around the house or simply sharing a few words in passing, the time we spent together was growing longer. There were moments when I felt like we were both pretending, but then there were moments when everything seemed to crack, and I realized how much we were both starting to depend on each other. It happened one night, a few days after the awkward encounter in the kitchen. My mom had gone out for the evening, leaving me and John alone again. At first, I tried to keep myself busy in my room, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something was about to happen. I couldn't explain why, but I just knew it. I found him sitting in the living room when I finally came downstairs. The lights were dim, and the soft glow of the TV was the only light in the room. He was sitting on the couch, flipping through a magazine. As soon as he saw me, his expression shifted slightly. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, but it was gone before I could figure out what it was. "Hey, you doing okay?" he asked casually, his voice just a bit lower than usual. "I didn't see you much today." I nodded, walking into the room slowly. "Yeah, just been in my room. Kind of needed some space." John glanced at me, then patted the spot next to him. "Well, if you need company, I'm here." I stood still for a moment, not sure how to respond. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I wasn't ready to face, but at the same time, I couldn't seem to turn away. I hesitated for only a few seconds before I walked over and sat down next to him, keeping a little distance between us. The space felt too small, and yet I couldn't move further away. We sat in silence for a while, watching whatever show was playing on the TV. But the quiet wasn't comforting anymore. Every minute that passed felt heavier, as if something was pressing down on me. I could feel his presence next to me, and it felt different now, too aware, too close. "You know," John said after a while, his voice breaking the stillness, "it's been nice, having these quiet moments together. I don't think I've told you enough how much I appreciate you, how much you mean to me." The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't the words themselves, but the way he said them. There was something in his tone that made my pulse race, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I turned to look at him, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the truth in his eyes. There was something more there than just fatherly care. "John," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly. I wasn't sure what I was going to say next, but the words felt like they were already on the tip of my tongue, just waiting to be released. He looked at me, his expression softening as he moved a little closer. His hand brushed against mine, just a quick touch, but it was enough to make everything inside me seize up. It was like time slowed down in that moment, and I knew that everything was about to change. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. I needed to pull away, to create space between us, but something inside me was fighting it. I was scared of what would happen if I let myself feel what I was starting to feel. "John, we can't," I said quickly, my voice barely above a whisper. My chest tightened as I spoke, but I didn't know how else to stop this. "This isn't right." He didn't pull away. Instead, he seemed to pause, as if he were waiting for me to say more. His gaze lingered on mine, and I could see the struggle in his eyes too. He was just as aware of what was happening as I was. "I know," he finally said, his voice a little strained. "I know it's complicated, but I don't want you to think that I'm trying to make things harder for you." His words were calm, but his hand didn't move away. It was still resting close to mine, and I could feel the warmth of his touch seeping into me, like it was pulling me in without me even realizing it. "I'm sorry," I said, pulling my hand back slightly, unsure of how to handle this. I couldn't keep pretending this was just a harmless connection between us. It wasn't. "I don't know what to do," he sighed softly, looking down at his hands. "I don't either," he admitted. "But I won't push you, okay? I just want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what." I nodded, but the words felt hollow. How could I pretend this wasn't happening? How could I go back to what things were before when everything between us had shifted so completely? For the next few moments, we didn't speak. The tension was too thick, the space between us too charged to ignore. And even though I knew I needed to leave before something else happened, I couldn't move. And then, as though a sudden realization hit both of us at once, we both stood up at the same time, like we were both trying to break the spell that had enveloped us. Neither of us said anything else. We just quietly left the room, neither one of us willing to address what had just passed between us. I went to my room that night, my thoughts in disarray. I knew one thing for sure: this situation couldn't go on. Something had to change. But the question was, what?